I guess we're live now. So the first question is, what is forced retraction?
Well, I guess I need to give you a tiny little wee biological lesson. When boys are born, and this is all boys, their foreskin is underdeveloped. It's still attached to the glans by a membrane or a synechia, I guess it's technically called the vilano-prepucial lamina. It's a layer of epithelial cells that gradually sheds over the first 10 years of the boy's life. So if somebody doesn't understand that bit of anatomy, or if they are, how should we say, in the sway of the old notion of Anglophone doctors that this is an adhesion, they will try and break that open, and that is forced retraction. And I have handled over 1,500 cases of forced retractions, advising parents, cheering them up, giving them first aid advice, advising them to get legal counsel, etc. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. So why is it so harmful?
Well, because it's a natural body process that membrane breaks down slowly while the boy's penis develops naturally. And so, first of all, it's a trauma to tear this membrane apart, just as that would be a trauma to break open a girl child's hymen just because you want to take a peek inside. And so it's an injury that it's a permanent injury. It can't be recovered from. And there are only a few things you can do to to help the child who's been forcibly retracted.
So why is this urgent?
Well, because we at DOC calculate that there's over 100,000 cases of this year. Many of the boys will recover, although they shouldn't really have to. But some will end up in the ER with terrible injuries and infection down the road, which was all totally unnecessary.
So why is it happening?
Because there's a very long-term ignorance on the part of Anglophone, that is American, British, New Zealand, Australian, etc., physicians about the anatomy of a child, of an intact child. And so the notion is that somehow the boy needs to have medical assistance to develop naturally. Of course, this is crap because 100,000 years ago, there weren't physicians. Everybody developed basically based on survival. People's penises developed because they developed, and nobody thought anything about it. And if they couldn't retract a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, they left him alone. Probably he would scream when they attempted to retract him. In the 19th century, there came this idea, and I'm digressing a little bit here, and feel free to stop me, that the fact that the boy's penis had these adhesions, as they called them, was somehow a problem, a disease problem. And understand, this was before germs were discovered. And so, of course, doctors thought, well, a boy with an adherent foreskin was somehow at risk because the foreskin would trap bacteria. They didn't even know about bacteria, actually, but the foreskin would somehow create itchy substances that would draw the boy's attention to his penis, and that he would touch it unnecessarily, and he would cause himself tuberculosis. I mean, that was a theory. It's crazy. It comes from the 1870s, and we laugh at it now, but it was deadly serious in the late 19th century and even the early 20th century. Just a tiny aside. My late mother, who died in 2017, was forced to wear scratchy muslin mittens that were sewn for her, and they were tied onto her wrists so she couldn't take them off when she slept at night, because the doctor's theory, this was in New Zealand in the 1920s, that if she touched her vulva, that somehow she would cause tuberculosis to spring forward. Also, she spent the first 5 or 6 years of her life in bed because a doctor heard a heart murmur and said she had to drink a cup of live chicken blood every day to assist her heart. So, I mean, this is the state of medicine in the 1920s. And she could laugh about it, but she said it wasn't much fun then to be drinking raw chicken blood.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, I've talked to some men that actually remember things breaking down there and becoming more and more retractable as they grew
Yep,
older. Of course, they retracted themselves,
yep.
and it was like the process felt maybe a little itchy down there or whatever. Like they, it was driving them to do something down there.
That's widely reported. And one of my physician colleagues says that it probably makes sense that that tissue, as it disintegrates, as it desquamates, the technical word, is a little itchy, is maybe even an evolutionary thing where it draws the boy's attention and he helps the process along by goofing with it. And of course, it's pretty embarrassing if your naked 3-year-old comes into the dining room and plays with his foreskin in an attempt to make that membrane go away.
Yeah,
But fact of the matter is that's normal primate behavior at that age for our species.
absolutely. Makes sense. Um, more a little bit about the why is it happening. I often imagine, I haven't very verified this with speaking to doctors and nurses, but
Mhm.
I think that the adhesion that is normal that we're born with is often confused with the kind of adhesions that sometimes happen after a circumcision, a prepuce amputation, where the remaining foreskin tries to adhere back to the glands, and you want to keep that from
Correct.
happening if you are circumcised, right? Because you
No,
don't
I
want
understand
skin.
that.
What's
I
that?
understand that. There's a difference between adhesions caused by a surgical procedure in which two raw layers of tissue lie against each other,
Yeah,
and the body's instinct, or what would you call it? Its biologic process is to fuse those two together to
that,
heal the body and seal it up and prevent further infection. But there's a difference between that and the membrane, the epithelial layer of the balanopreputial lamina,
no,
because that layer is just a layer that's gradually dissipating as the organ develops. It's very different from an adhesion that's unnatural and that needs to be lysed. That's lysed. That's a process by which a physician uses a mechanical object, typically a closed hemostat, to
no,
break open adhesions and then cover the surfaces with, say, Vaseline or something, so they don't readhere.
no.
But the balanopreputial lamina is not an adhesion. It's commonly referred to by OBGYNs, pediatricians, urologists, etc., as an adhesion, but it's far from that.
Yeah.
It's not an unnatural connection. It's a natural connection, and it will dissipate in time. The average time for that membrane or that synechia, that epithelial tissue layer, to dissipate is age 10. It's actually age 10.4, and that's with an N equals 10,000 study of boys in Europe where they're not typically forcibly retracted. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, Anglophone doctors acquired this idea that somehow this membrane was a birth defect and that all boys were subject to it, and they needed to save the boy from his birth defect by forcibly retracting it. Millions, literally millions of American men who are intact today were forcibly retracted as infants. Of course, many of them did not survive the forcible retraction and were circumcised as a result of the infection or other disease processes that proceeded from the forced retraction.
Yeah. So I'm imagining that not just medical professionals aren't educated of everything you just explained, but since they're not educated and they don't tell the parents of intact boys about this, then it continues
Well,
to go down that road.
I have to tell you, I've been doing this work for like 25 years and hundreds of cases and lots of tearful parents and boys screaming in the background. And here's the thing, even today in 2023, there are still nurses and young residents and young docs who are trained that this membrane is a birth defect and that they would be doing the child and the parents a service if they broke it open. It's terrible. And when I report these people to their medical societies, almost nothing happens because, of course, the medical society is under the same crazy notions that their own members are. And also, this is how they're trained, and this is what they think is normal.
Yeah.
And so when we report them to their medical societies, almost nothing happens. And they usually laugh and say, well, this is how I was trained. This is what I'm supposed to do. Why are you complaining? It's
So,
a fantastically huge and expensive medical scandal that has yet to be fully revealed.
okay. So when you say medical societies, is that you're like including the AAP or the Urologist Association,
Well,
or the
not really.
state
The
boards?
AAP has actually come out firmly against forced retraction, and they have had numerous published
Good.
warnings not to forcibly retract their children. But the fact of the matter is that the U.S., for instance, is a 50 medical society community. You can think of it as a gigantic version of Europe
Mhm.
with bad information circulating among all the 50 states. It's just the way it is. And so you might have a success in Illinois, but you'll have a failure in Indiana because this information that this boy's membrane is a birth defect is incredibly widely spread and widely held and widely believed. I have a niece who's a medical resident at Oregon Health. What's it? OHSA, Oregon Health. You would probably know it more than I, John. The Oregon Health University in Portland, and she has no training whatsoever in this. She freely admits it just was not even part of her training.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. So what do you say to parents who call you about it?
Well, I mean, first of all, my major thing, if the child has already been retracted, is to give first aid advice so that the child can be comfortable. We advise parents not to retract the child. We advise shallow baths. We advise reassuring the child if he's old enough to understand language that this was an accident and they still love him and the doctor made a mistake. And we do not advise using emollients or other things. We advise putting the foreskin back where it was and hoping that the body can deal with the injury. But sometimes the body's response to those two raw surfaces having been ripped apart is to fuse them with adhesions, with genuine adhesions, which are unnatural. And our advice is to leave those adhesions alone and not allow somebody to retract, to lice them, to force them apart, because it's better actually to leave them alone. Licing them merely introduces more trauma, which will cause more adhesions, which will cause more problems. And basically you're chasing your tail at that point. So our advice is to not forcibly retract the boy if he gets adhesions, and to leave him alone and allow the hormones of pre-puberty, age 10, 11, 12, et cetera, to deal with them. It's important to note that the glands of the internal penis does not need cleaning. It does not need to be seen. It can remain a secret until the boy is 10 or 11 or 12. And revealing it doesn't give you anything. It doesn't buy you any new hygiene. It doesn't buy you any disease protection.
Yeah.
It's just a really bad idea. So leaving the adhesions, leaving the injury created by the forced retraction, the adhesions alone, is not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Do you say anything to the parents about taking any kind of action legally or complaining or anything like that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I never report a doctor to his or her medical society without getting the parents' permission. They have to be fully on board with a complaint. Many of them are screamingly angry. I remember a case of a doctor whose child was forcibly retracted, who was just livid, and he wanted to kill everybody in his scenario. And so what I do is I tell the parents, if you want me to help you as a co-complainant, Doctors Opposing Circumcision will supply a very lengthy medical memo about how this is an injury, and we will support your claim. and but we need your signature to do so because we don't want to overstep the relationship between you and your physician. So many parents get cold feet, as you can imagine. Some parents are really angry and they want to go for it. And we help those parents with a very professional, very thick submission to the state medical society. But you can imagine, I mean, I've been doing it for 25 years. I have not had even one complaint from a medical society sustained, not one. I have had an apology from a physician, a personal apology to the parents. And who knows what his motivation was, maybe just to deflect a medical malpractice claim. And I have had one thank you and an apology from a physicians group which said, hell, we had no idea that this was an injury. We've been doing this forever and we'll stop tomorrow. And that was wonderful. But that's 2 out of what, 1,500 plus. I mean, I've been saying 1,500 for 3 or 4 years. And I'm sure in several hundred cases beyond that now.
Goodness. So this one you already kind of answered. What have you done to stop it, and what has been the response? And you just answered that.
Well, I always copy the state chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is not always called that. It's sometimes called the Pediatric Association of XYZ State. And I often copy the AAP's home office in Illinois, hoping that somehow somebody with a little humanity and a little good sense will say, what the heck is going on here? Yeah. Why are 100,000 children injured each year? And who's handling the expense of all that? But it never seems to help. I mean, it makes me feel good that I've reported it to the highest authorities on the issue, but I've had absolutely no real useful response to protect these children. Oh, and recently, in an Oregon case, I reported it to the Oregon Attorney General's office and all the assistant attorney generals who deal with child welfare, child injury, child health, etc. Crickets. Nothing happened. Shocking. Absolutely shocking.
What can others do?
Excuse me, say again?
What can other people do?
Well, I mean, I just think deluging these state societies with a complaint and copying it to the AAP and copying it to their local attorney general wouldn't be a bad idea. They don't
follow through.
Yeah. I'm happy to help, but they don't need me.
Yeah.
They can make their same complaint. But also, I think the smartest thing that parents can do is to forbid forcible retraction in the first instance. In other words, say to any, by the way, most of my forced retraction cases come from 6-month, 1 year, 18-month, 24-month well baby visits. And so my advice to parents who call me in advance, thank God some of them do, but most call when it's too late. But for the ones who call me early, I say, please tell your physician, your nurse practitioner, your PA, do not retract my son's foreskin. I absolutely forbid it. It's an injury. You will suffer consequences if you do that. I mean, most medical people are risk averse, and if they hear something like that from a parent, they probably desist. Unfortunately, of course, sometimes they fire the parents and won't attend to their child anymore. No. I always warn parents who want to complain. I always ask them, are you in a small town? Is this your only pediatric clinic? Are you cutting yourself off from medical care for your child? Because it may be that your pediatrician, aside from this one issue, is maybe very smart and can spot other diseases and stop things and prevent things and give you good advice, and you should maintain that relationship. But for people in larger cities with lots of choices, I say, report them. Report them and I'll help you do it.
So people can go out to, I think, like Your Whole Baby and print out a printout or something like that and take that with them to hand to the doctor. Which would be,
and I'm on the board of Your Whole Baby, and I encourage people to check with them all the time. They are a wonderful group of people. They have really good information. They are real up on forced retraction injuries and the proper care of an intact boy. And so this is a great place to go.
Okay. This is the last question. What other things should attorneys know about this?
Well, okay, let's speak to my colleagues. I mean, I was I was a personal injury attorney. I specialized in maritime law because I have an extra law degree in maritime law. But my advice to attorneys is don't take these cases on whimsically, because they'll typically be slotted into the medical malpractice scenario of your state. And usually that involves affidavits from other doctors, having to get an affidavit from a doctor of that same level of specialty. And those things can be very expensive. It's like $50,000 or more. And the problem is that nobody feels terribly sorry for little boys. I mean, if a little boy's penis is forcibly retracted to bleeding and infection, and he's miserable for 2 or 3 weeks, nobody's going to throw 50 grand against that for pain and suffering. So my warning to attorneys is don't take these cases on whimsically. Make sure you set it up carefully. Make sure you find some support in the community for it, because quite frankly, the large majority of medical practitioners in urology, family practice, pediatrics are completely in the thrall of 19th century ideas of boys' anatomy. And they will not support your case. They will not confront a colleague. They will not risk their reputation in the community. They will not risk referrals they get from other doctors to support your case. So you have to be extra careful. I mean, I'm hoping that there will be a group of attorneys who can break through this, who can handle the Rule 11 sanctions, who can handle judges laughing at them or humiliating them, and can bring some of these cases and bring this to the forefront. But boy, it's tough stuff. I mean, I have faced Rule 11 sanctions myself, and I know how horrific that is. And so I wish my colleagues luck, and I hope they all push this, but it's a minefield. It's genuinely a minefield. Sometimes when a scandal is big enough that everybody is involved, it's hard to crack.
So if a young man turns 18 and he still has a couple years on the statute of limitations, and he had the money, there's one family I know that is taking on a lawsuit right now. But if they had the money and they wanted to, throw 100 grand and, having lawyers and all that because they feel horribly harmed by being forcefully retracted and they had to get surgery or whatever as a late age teen, you think something like that would work?
Well, I mean, every situation is different. I mean, I wish that attorney luck, and it would be lovely if we had some plaintiffs who say, I don't care about Rule 11, I'll cover you on that. Let's plunge ahead. That would be nice, but that's not the typical situation with plaintiffs that I have faced in my years of practice. So yeah, it's tough. It's very, very, very tough. I mean, even when the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the American Urological Association, et cetera, all forbid forcible retraction, independent practitioners have remarkably free rein to pretty much do what they want to kids. And frankly, I've had a couple cases in which the state society wrote back and said, well, yeah, it's not a good thing, but it's not that bad enough. I mean, they said it in fancy legal language, but that's kind of what they said. And so it's tough.
Yeah, I reported a couple things to the California Medical Board about things that were being said incorrectly or whatever.
Oh God, the CMB, they're the worst.
Yeah,
I've had I don't know, a dozen cases in front of them. It's always the same crap. It's always a word process letter about this does not rise to the level of behavior that is outside the standard practice.
Yeah.
Which means you can injure children as much as you like in California, and no one will say a thing.
Yeah. One case, they actually did not disagree with me. They just said that's not important enough.
Correct. That's exactly what they say.
Okay.
That's because they're in the pocket of their own practitioners. And remember that most state medical societies are basically just staffed by retired doctors who have social relations and professional relations with the people they're regulating. You can't expect them to come out swinging. I mean, admittedly, they do so on sexual abuse cases, because of course you don't want that on you don't want being nice to a sexual abuser on your professional resume. But as to injuries to children caused by fantastically stupid 19th century medical myths, no problem.
Crazy.
I hope I'm not horrifying you, John. I've been doing it for a very long time. You're talking to a very, very cynical guy who's
Yeah.
been on a lot of roads and been slapped around a lot.
Yeah, you've told me some of the stuff as in our previous conversations, so it's not surprising. But I do thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I hope some other attorneys watch it and get intrigued and maybe look at the materials that you shared, and we'll have those materials on the GALDEF website.
And they should feel free to call me. There will be no charge for my consultation. I've helped dozens and dozens of attorneys over the years, and I'm happy to help everyone who calls.
Totally
And
appreciate
I have all the professional data at my fingertips, and I can send you in a single send everything you need to prep your case.
Great. That's awesome. And yeah, your phone number is still on the doc website,
Yeah,
right?
and my children keep saying, Dad, you need to get a surreptitious fake phone number that buzzes your other phone number so that you're not getting all these crazy calls.
Yeah.
I haven't done that yet. So yeah, my regular phone number is available on the Doctors Opposing Circumcision website. And although I've had lots of threatening calls, I've never had a death threat. I guess my first death threat, I'll get a new phone number.
All right. Thanks again,
Cheers,
John.
John. Nice to chat with you. Best of luck with your group.
You too. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Cheers.